Harvard Divinity School.
Wisdom from the Edge, March 27th, 2024.
My name is Giovanna Parmigiani, and I'm the host of this series organized within the Transcendence and Transformation Initiative at the CSWR here at Harvard Divinity School. As some of you might know, this series focuses on ways of knowing that are often labeled as non-rational, traditionally referred to as gnosis in Western philosophical and religious traditions, and often understood in contraposition to science. These ways of knowing are becoming more and more influential in contemporary societies, popular culture, and academic research. What is the place of spirit possession, divination, and experiences perceived as out of the ordinary in our lives? How can we study and approach this type of phenomena? Going beyond dichotomies such as body and mind, ordinary and extraordinary, reason and experience, and matter and spirit. This series of scholars of different disciplines and practitioners interested in exploring and expanding the boundaries of what counts as knowledge today. So it is with immense pleasure that I introduce today's guest, Paul Stoller. Paul Stoller is professor of anthropology at Westchester University and a permanent fellow at the Center for Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences at Friedrich Alexander University, Erlanger-Nuremberg. In his more than 30 years of anthropological research and writing, Stoller has focused on Songhai religion in Niger and the life of West African street traders in New York City. Stoller's work encompasses the study of economic exchange, religion, ethnographic film, and the human quest for well-being in turbulent times. In his most recent work, he investigates how indigenous wisdom can not only enhance social well-being, but also help to heal a troubled world. Stoller has published 16 books, including ethnographies, biographies, memoirs, as well as 3 novels. Since 2010, he has been blogging regularly on culture, politics, and higher education for the Huffington Post and Psychology Today, and has become an advocate for a more public and engaged anthropology. In 2013, King Carl Gustaf of Sweden awarded him the Anders Fretzius Gold Medal in Anthropology. In 2015, the American Anthropological Association presented him the Anthropology in Media Award. So thank you, Paul, for being here with us. It's a great honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today we will discuss your latest book, Wisdom from the Edge, in which you describe what scholars can do to contribute to the social and cultural changes that shape a social future of well-being. Fantastic topic. I can't wait to delve into, details of this book, but I would like to start with your backstory. I always start with this question. I'm always very curious about, how did you get interested in anthropology, first of all, and in ethnography, and what's your relationship with ethnography?
Well, I got interested, sort of slid through the back door into anthropology. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Republic of Niger, and I taught English as a second language. And the reason that I went into the Peace Corps was basically I was trying to avoid going to the war in Vietnam, and I got an occupational deferment, and then eventually I got conscientious objector status. So I was in this place called Tillabéri in Niger on the eastern bank of the Niger River. And I was teaching on a compound, and behind the school was a sand dune, and I used to hear music coming from the top of the sand dune every day. And eventually curiosity got the best of me, and I trudged up to the sand dune. At the time I was 23 years old. I trudged up, and I came upon what turned out to be a spirit possession ceremony, right? So I had seen one the year before, but I'd never really participated in it. So I go in, and an old man comes up to me, and he says, "Welcome," and he says, come and look at our ceremony." So I get into the audience, I hear all this fantastic music, and I like to dance. So I started moving my body, in trying to catch the rhythm of the music. And And so eventually my teacher, who turned out to be my teacher out of Tonga, said, why don't you try? Why don't you try to dance? You know, unabashed at 23 years of age, why not? So I got onto the dance ground, and I did my best to, you know, dance. I had my arms up in the air like this, and I was stomping my feet. And then people seemed to appreciate that. They gave me a very small round of applause. My teacher said, you showed us respect today. Please come back. Whenever you hear the music, come and join us and be part of our community. And so for the last 4 months of my tenure as a professor of English at this secondary school, I went to witness spirit possession ceremonies, and it propelled me. I was so taken by it. It propelled me to go on to graduate school and study linguistics and then social anthropology. And I was lucky enough to get a grant to go back and continue my research. And that was the start of a very long period of time of doing research in the Republic of Niger among spirit possession specialist healers called Sohanchi, and also healers called Sorko. Sorko work on magic in the river, and Sohanchi are the great descendants of the great Songhai king Sani Alibert, who was king of the Songhai Empire from 1464 to 1491. And so that tradition has been passed down all the way from the 15th century to the present. And so I happen to, stumble onto these great teachers and masters, and I've spent my career trying to understand the wisdom that they attempted to convey to me. Backstory.
That's a fantastic backstory. Thank you for sharing it with us. And I'm so happy there are 3 generations here of anthropologists and, ethnographers. So can I ask, what have been the main challenges and opportunities during your career in terms of, your engagement? Because I think it's a very important question to address before moving on to, why you wrote Wisdom from the Edge today.
I think that one of the things, my major challenge was I confronted phenomena that I could not explain. I confronted things that I saw people handle fire. I saw people eat poison plants, not get burned, not get sick. Just seeing a spirit possession ceremony up close is something that is sort of transformative. It's hard to explain. There are other examples that I have in the book where, I had a confrontation with in the middle of the night with what the song I called the Atakurma, which are the elves of the bush, and they came and scratched on my door, and it's things I just could not explain. And so, as an anthropologist trained in scientific anthropology, my challenge was, how do I confront these issues? How do I express them? Do I try to theoretically explain these kinds of things that didn't necessarily could not necessarily be reduced to theory, or should I find some other way of trying to approach these kinds of things? And in some cases early on, there was a lot of sort of people sort of say, well, this is not the way you do anthropology. You don't write stories. You don't you don't give credence to say, in my case, Songhai theories of what spirit possession is or what magic and sorcery is. We have theories that try to explicate these kinds of things, and I resisted that. And the reason that I resisted it was because I created a bond with my teacher, sort of like he was another father to me, and that deep bond, and I understood something I got from my mentor, Jean Rouch, the great French filmmaker. And that is that the quality of is a direct related quality of the relationships you develop. This very deep love for my teacher. And we don't talk about too much in anthropology about love, but love is really an important element of doing field work. And so I felt this deep love for him and deep respect for him. And I figured, now what would he say about what would he say about what I'm writing? What would be his take on what I was trying to do? And that was always my first, my first question. How would he respond to this book, Wisdom from the Edge, or anything else that I've written? How would he respond to that? And so, so his orientation and the orientation of the discipline, of the sort of institution of the academy, were very different. His orientation to time, space, knowledge, very, very different from what my training sort of formed in me. So those have been my challenges. And as time has gone on, things have gotten a little bit better, and there's more space for the kind of writing that I like to do than there was when I first started out, in the 1970s and 80s. So that has been a slow evolution, but I still say that what the kind of writing that I do is less marginal than it used to be, but it's still in terms of institutional expectations is still on the margins, so to speak. But that's for me. What's important is how do I convey with respect and dignity the wisdom of my teacher, and that has been my greatest challenge. And in some of the things I've done, I've succeeded. In some of the things I've done, maybe not so well. But it's that's my challenge.
I really love what you just said. First of all, because I think that it's easier today for anthropologists like me and anthropologists to be like Ref to inhabit the ethnographic space in that same way because of you and ethnographers and anthropologists like you, who opened a way within academia to be able to really talk about love. And when I talk to my students about IRB, you have to go through this texting process of getting approval for our research. I frame it as a labor of love, really, towards our interlocutors. It could be framed differently, but I think it's very important to recognize this dimension of the ethnographic field work. Jeff, do you have any question? Because I, as a the younger person here in this conversation.
Yeah, I love this sort of discourse on love and centering your love for your interlocutors and sort of their perspective. And it ties to a question that I have that came up for me as I was reading the book, which is around sort of the way in which this love and these relationships for your teachers and for the Sanghe and all of the folks that you have met and work with, how is that love for them transformed you? How has that changed how you move through the world? And and how do you sort of then try to translate those changes that you have to an audience who maybe hasn't gone through those same changes?
Oh, my experience here fundamentally transformed me from, the experiences that I had and listening to these very wise and wise people, and having lived there, transformed the way I oriented myself to the world. It made me more spiritual, I guess. I took seriously what things, signs that I would see. They took me seriously enough to give me materials for an altar, which I keep in my house. I have an altar in my house, and they trained me in divination, and sometimes I use that for family and friends. But it also oriented me to the fundamental thing of what is important in life is for them and for me is the sort of maintenance of your social relations with your family, with your colleagues, and the kind of balance that one tries to achieve between a balance between people and harmonious social relations. And also, we'll get to this in a moment, a harmony between human beings and the forces of nature, or what Adamujani Tonga would call the bush. And those kinds of, it's taught me to be much more harmonious and respectful. And but also it's taught me to slow down a little bit, although, my partner would say that I haven't slowed down enough. But, to slow down and take your time to make sure that, that things are done with care, with respect, and with, diligence. So, I mean, there are all sorts of Songhai proverbs about, taking the time to do your work properly. And an apprenticeship among Songhai, my teacher's apprenticeship was 40 years, right? And the idea of time is important as well, because, when you are, Songhai people believe, and this has affected the way I orient myself. Songhai people believe that when you're young, your mind is developing, you can learn a lot, but what you're learning is sort of the building blocks of whatever practice you're going to do. So let's say you're an apprentice to a sorcerer. So you memorize incantations, you get sent out into the bush to look for plants, you witness, healing sessions, et cetera. But your mind has not developed sufficiently for you to learn important things. And so you go through and you go through many, many years of development, learning more, refining your practice, refining your knowledge of plants, increasing your repertoire of incantations. And then, and you continue to do that. You extend your practices. You treat more people. You deal with the divination sessions. You mix potions. You tend to people. But it's not until you're an elder that you're ready to learn important things. So, and for the Songhai elders is around 60 years of age or so, or something like that. And the Songhai believe that your mind ripens with experience. And so when your mind is ripe, then with the experience of love and loss, basically, when your mind is ripe, then you're ready to really learn the important things, right? And two important things. One is you continue to practice what you've learned. But the most important thing for the elder who is a specialist is to convey what she or he has learned to the next generation. That's your sacred trust. And so in my own case, I see, where I am now, having, done all the work that I've done, is I see myself as, my most important thing to do at this stage of my life is to mentor people, right? Convey what knowledge I have, that I've sort of come upon and internalized, and bring that to as many people as I can. Not that I want them to be carbon copies of me, but to use the knowledge any way they see fit to move on their own path. Mm-hmm. And so that has fundamentally challenged me and shaped me as both a scholar and as a person.
Wonderful. You mentioned in brief the bush, right? Yeah. Which is a protagonist really of Wisdom from the Edge.
Bush is real,
do you want to introduce us to the bush?
Sure.
Thanks.
I'll read a section.
Yes, please.
This is from the preface of my book. Early one morning, during ethnographic fieldwork in Tillabéri, Niger, the hottest town in the hottest country in the world, I sat on a beautifully woven palm frond mat in the shade of Adamu Tongo's thatched spirit hut. For several months, I had been living in my mentor's compound, which he had built at the edge of the village. At sunrise, Adamu Tongo, my teacher and an important Songhai healer, had told me that he wanted to talk to me about important matters. Shortly thereafter, he arrived with a brazier full of hot embers. His grandson followed behind, bringing a porcelain platter on which he had placed a teapot, one large water glass, and 2 shot glasses. Adamu Tongo poured water into the teapot, measured a shot glass full of strong Chinese green tea, and put it on the embers. We'll drink tea and talk about life. Not knowing how to respond, I sat quietly. When the tea water boiled, my teacher added sugar and went through the pouring ritual, emptying the steeping tea into the water glass and returning it to the teapot 3 times. Finally, he poured tea into our shot glasses and we began to sip. We sipped the strong tea. As we sipped the strong tea, We looked at one another for a long moment. You have been coming here for years, he said, breaking the silence. I nodded. And you've learned a great deal. I have much more to learn, I admitted. You do, he said, but today I want you to open your ears and understand what's important. I am listening, Baba. He turned his head toward the east and looked beyond the edge of the village to take in the bush, wild, uninhabited space where powerful spirits live. Good, he said, still looking at the bush. Times are bad. People have lost respect for the old words and for the old ways. He turned and looked at me. Our fathers and mothers understood how bad it is for people to speak with two mouths and feel with two hearts. People who speak with two mouths and feel with two hearts anger the spirits of the bush. When the bush is angry, there is not enough rain. When the bush is angry, there is too much rain. When the bush is angry, locusts eat our crops and sickness kills our people. He sipped more tea. Several cranes flew overhead. A donkey brayed in the distance. Shaking his head, my mentor continued, every day our people do things to anger the bush. Every day I make offerings to the bush to set things right, to bring one mouth, one heart balance to the world. That is what the elders taught me. That is my work. He finished his tea. That's what I want to teach you. I hope that my work can become your work. And then I go on to say, the bush is angry today. As we all know, the bush is very angry today. And I don't need to, and the book is, the Wisdom from the Edge, I'll just read one more paragraph, is my attempt to transform Adamujeni Tongo's work into my work. And in the book, I hope to demonstrate what anthropologists might do to contribute to the social and cultural changes that can shape a social future of well-being and viability. And so in the following pages, I attempt to show how anthropologists can use sensually described ethnographic narratives to powerfully communicate their slowly developed insights to a wide range of audiences. These insights are filled with the wisdom about how respect for nature, the bush, is central to the future of Homo sapiens. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. I'm sure that many among our participants now would like to buy the book if they did not already, because I think there are a number of things to unpack from this, but I would like to ask the first question in conversation with Kim, someone from our audience. Hi, Kim. She asked, as an anthropologist and ethnographer, have you personally had any experiences in the field that were phenomenological, transformative, religious, or spiritual, like what your interlocutors were experiencing, not as an academic observer, but as a first-hand participant? And I rephrase this question, what's your relationship with the bush in Niger and here? Do you still, I don't know,
well, the bush is, well, in Niger, the bush is awe-inspiring. I mean, it's just, it's overwhelming, and it is a dangerous place. I would go out into the bush just about every day that I was there. Sometimes my teacher would send me out searching for plants. Sometimes I had a horse, so I would ride my horse out into the bush. I used to go to a place, a butte, overlooking the Niger River, and the name of the butte was the place where stories are told, where people would bring their children there to tell stories of the past, and the present, and stories about healing and spirits, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had a deep, I'm just awed by when I go to places like, when I go to Tilbury in Niger, I'm awed by the bush, its power, it's sort of reverential. Here, I spent one of the places that I really like is New Mexico. I had a residency in Santa Fe for a year, and one of the things that I loved about it was the bush of New Mexico reminded me of the bush of Niger, and I had the same sort of spiritual feeling of power and reverence. And then in my life here on the East Coast of the United States, I walk in an old growth forest every day. I can be accused of, and I'm sorry, but I do talk to trees, and If I see a tree is suffering with ivy growing on it, I pull the ivy off of it. And I find that walking this old growth forest, which is right next to my house, regenerates me, gives me ideas, it makes me feel whole. And so that whole orientation to nature and the bush comes from my experience in Niger and has been it's transformed here in the US. So yes, I have reverence for the bush. And the thing is that you tap, the thing about the bush is that you understand, it's there's a Songhai saying that, is that when you go into the bush, people say nigo gngwa genjo, which you're going to eat the bush. It means that you're going to consume the bush. But ultimately, they said genjo gnigwa, which means the bush consumes you. And so and my whole orientation of writing is about that, is the sense of you open yourself to nature, you open yourself to the bush, which is a kind of risky endeavor, but you open yourself in order to try to understand it. And I mentioned, I think in the book, the artist Paul Klee, who talked about how do you paint a forest? And he says, you open yourself to the forest and let the forest enter you. And then you paint to break out of this sort of situation. You paint in order to break out of the sort of being captured by the forest. And what transpires is, his great art. In my case, you open yourself to experience, you open yourself to other people, things that may not be understandable, things which may shock you or frighten you. You open yourself to that experience, you open yourself to other people, and that's the way that you connect. In doing anthropology, you connect that way. People understand very quickly whether you are open or closed. And if you're open, that creates a kind of connection. And I try to do the same thing in my writing, where I try to write things in which I express my own vulnerabilities. And in so doing, I hope it creates a kind of connection between reader and writer, or you can do the same thing in film, between filmmaker and audience. And all of those kinds of things get people, maybe people will feel something they haven't felt before. Maybe they'll think something new, or, maybe they'll turn the page or continue to watch. The whole notion of social connection is, which is sort of the foundation of social relations among people in Songhai and Niger, is, what can be more important in human relations than our connections with other people and our connections with nature.
Fantastic. I was wondering, you're a scholar of magic, right? A scholar of magic, and you did an apprenticeship. You had a teacher who taught you things. What's the role of magic in your life and relationship with the bush, including the relationship with the bush? Do you developed what you learned? Did magic become part of you? What's your relationship with it?
Yes. Well, whenever I set out on a journey, I don't go empty-handed, right? So I have things, and I have incantations. So if I get on a plane, it's my obligation as someone who learned these kinds of things to do things to, sort of make things harmonious, right? So there's the fundamental incantation among Songhai is called Genji Hao, and that means that which harmonizes the bush, Genji Hao. And so the Genji Hao is creating harmony between what's outside and what's inside. So in the case of, for example, one of my books, I talk about my experience of having cancer. And I talk about the first time that that I went for my first chemotherapy session. And I was scared, and I feared for my mortality. I thought I was going to die. I had, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I thought there's no cure for it. So I thought I was going to die. And so here's my oncologist and my brother, we were there, and in the examination room, and fearing for my mortality, I said, and he explained to me what was going to happen with the chemotherapy sessions and dripping poison into my body. And I said, well, I have to approach this a different way. I have to do it a different way. And he said, well, what's that? He said, well, give me your hand. So I took his hand, I took my brother's hand. I recited this Genji-how that I just mentioned before. I said, and he said, what's that? I said, well, that creates harmony. And he said, I have internal disharmony. If there's disharmony outside of me, how can I heal? So I need to create a space of harmony for healing to take place. So I recited the Genji-how, and then I spit in the four corners of his examination room, because the words have to go outside of you in the four cardinal directions. So he looked at me and he said, oh, okay, that's all right. Then he went and did his computations, and he came back, and then he took me to the room where the other people were, where where you get chemotherapy, and he introduced me to my oncology nurse, and he introduced me to her, and she was the most beautiful woman that I had ever seen in my life. I mean, incredible. So she said, "Oh, my name is so and so, and I'm going to take Paul. I'm going to take very, very good care of you." So I turned to my oncologist. I said, "You see, it's beginning to work already, right? It's working well." And so every time that I went for a chemotherapy session, I would recite the Genji-how. I'd spit in the four cardinal directions. Nurses they were cool with it. The other patients understood what I was doing, and so I couldn't go through the experience without approaching it not just from a Western medical standpoint, but from a sort of West African medical standpoint. Had to do both, and so far it's worked pretty well.
Thank you for sharing this for us. How does this stand with you, Jeff? How do you feel about, I don't know. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's all making me think about sort of the ineffability of a lot of these experiences, or the seeming ineffability. I lived for a couple of years a little bit north of Santa Fe in New Mexico, and I know that feeling of going out into the sagebrush and having sort of this. It's profound, and almost, for me, hard to put into words. And yet,
Yeah.
I sense, Paul, that in your work and in Wisdom from the Edge, it's really a conversation about how can artful and sensory ethnography communicate these feelings, and sort of bring the reader into that world, not just intellectually, but really viscerally. And I would love to hear more about how you approach that, how you think about it, and what you're hoping readers will take away from the book in that regard.
Fantastic question. So the thing is that scholars of religion and scholars, anthropological scholars, we have developed over the years, profound insights about the human condition. But more often than not, those profound insights are buried under jargon and language, which is quasi-theoretical, unapproachable, unassailable, and which meets that kind of language meets institutional expectation. So how do you get away from that? Well, the thing is that, if you go to a conference, and I've been going to conferences a long time, most people read these kinds of texts. They're 15 minutes long, and they race through it. They have their jargon, their principal sites. There's nothing wrong with this kind of thing. I mean, it's perfectly okay. But how many? I ask myself, how many? I've been doing it for like 30 more years. How many oral presentations at these conferences do I remember? Hardly any. I remember Margaret Mead because she was funny and told stories, and I remember Paul Farmer because he was funny and told stories, right? So there's something about storytelling, which Jerome Bruner, the great cognitive psychologist, called the narrative construction of reality. And that there's something about narrative that sticks with people. And how do most people convey their wisdom from one generation to the next? How is culture conveyed from one generation to the next? Is done through stories, right? So I thought, the best way to try to sort of represent these kinds of profound experiences is through narrative. And in graduate education, we don't really talk very much. We don't teach our graduate students about writing, right? And we don't, and there are techniques that one can use that really create memorable stories, right? So I do these writing workshops. I've been doing them for 15 years, and we have sessions on how to set a scene, how to evoke space and place. We have sessions on dialogue writing, which is, usually dialogue in, talk in most academic discourse is a long indentation of, translated transcripts, transcripts that are put on the page. You get no idea of how they speak, how that speech is indicative of their personality. Most scenes are described not, place and space are one of the great gifts of ethnography is it gives the reader a sense of locality, and space and place are not, taught in graduate school. How do you evoke that? And then the other thing is character. We have informants or interlocutors, and these are people that have personalities. They have histories. They have distinct ways of talking, ways of their distinct expressions. Each person is distinct in some way. How do you bring that out? So you describe. So character can be developed through dialogue, how a person speaks, description of what they're wearing, how they're walking, and space and place. Of course, these are elements that are not just inert things like buildings, or they are spaces and places have memory. Memories are embedded in spaces and places, right? So if I go to a certain, I go to a certain spot in one of my walks in the old growth forest, I remember, sometimes I remember an event that took place, something happened next to this tree, right? So, or I have a photo in the book of a baobab tree next to the Institute of African Studies and the University of Ghana and Legon. And that tree has been witness to fundamental, fantastic events at this institute that was founded in 1960 by Kwame Nkrumah, and where the great debates of African studies have taken place over the years, and political debates as well about, Ghanaian politics. So that tree has been witness to, what has it witnessed? So by treating space and place as something that's alive with memory, it sort of unleashes the creativity of how you go about describing it. So all those kinds of things, they're all geared to creating a narrative, and the narrative is geared to, trying to get the reader to appreciate, to live in that space, to hear what the person is saying, to get a sense of that character. Oh, that person reminds me of so and so. And when they hopefully, when someone finishes the book, they will say that, my book or any other book that's written with a lot of narrative in it, I really learned something from that. Or when you get to the last page, I'm sorry, I'm at the last page because, gee, I want this to continue, right? So writing a book is creating the kind of, for me, it's crafting a relationship with a reader, sort of a reader or readers that hopefully will continue. So people will, maybe they'll talk to their friends about it. Maybe they'll, bring it up. Maybe they will write me a little note. And so it's ultimately, it all goes back to this notion of social connection, which goes back to, my sort of what I learned in Niger, what I experienced in Niger among Songhai people.
Thanks, Paul. In Wisdom from the Edge, you make this point, and you also explain, at least in my reading of it, how writing an artful ethnography, taking into consideration the sensory narrative, the stories, has also a political implication, how the role of anthropology today, looking about the future and looking about, the climate crisis.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that, people like Adamujeni Tongo or some of the other elders, Native American elders that I cite in the book, or South American elders that I cite in the book, they, they have lived in challenging circumstances. They understand the power of the bush, the power of nature, and how we have to be respectful of it. And they've been talking about these issues for many years, long before the climate emergency became part of our sort of general discourse. But we tend not to listen to them, unfortunately. They're seen as indigenous people, or they're seen as elders who don't have scientific training, et cetera, et cetera. And what they have been saying, of course, they've been predicting what we're experiencing now in terms of the climate crisis. And I'll mention a book by two friends of mine. It's called On Hypo Subjects, and it's Timothy Morton and Dominic Boyer are the authors of it. It came out in 2021. And in it, they say basically that, we've created this sort of hyper reality of things that, that we think we can explain things. We think we can control things, that we are the sort of quote unquote masters of the universe. We can extract from the universe what we want. And if we have a problem, we can solve it with technology. And they say, when I was reading that book, what dawned upon me, and the reason that I was inspired to write Wisdom from the Edge, was that I discovered in reading what they're saying about what they call hyposubjectivity, which is people recognizing the limits of their knowledge, being modest, appreciating the power of nature, that nature is more powerful than human beings. Understanding that kind of modesty, admitting that I don't know something, focusing on the limits of our understanding, and then also being more collaborative, more modest in our approach. All these things my teacher had been saying to me, 30 years before they wrote the book. And so, it's imperative. So for anthropologists and other scholars who choose this route, we, publishing this book, doing a podcast, as does Dominic Boyer, and he does a beautiful podcast on electricity and climate emergency, writing books, blogging, getting the message out. It's a slog, but it's worth doing, because eventually it takes a long time to change. I mean, the notion of being mastery of the universe or mastery of nature goes back well before the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it's baked into our ideology. So it's going to take a long time for us to sort of work our way out of it. And they say that by adopting this sort of more modest approach to scholarship, I mean, when they talk about extraction, right, and the extraction of late capitalism, we extract things from the earth, and we're seeing we're paying the price of all of that extraction. But I also think that scholars extract as well, right? So we extract theories from the ongoing experience of social life. And very often what that does is it sort of minimizes the experience from which the theory is extracted, right? So we have, they suggest new approaches to scholarship, to our relation to nature, to our relation to one another. And this book is sort of like one element of that sort of movement, to be more humble, and to be and to be sort of slowly recognize our weaknesses, but also to sort of celebrate our strengths.
I don't know, Jeff, when you read the book, but when I read the book, I was really struck by Paul's framing anthropology as the in-between, right? The in-between that allows to some point to think about the otherwise in a way, but the in-betweenness. And I don't know about you if you have any questions on this, Jeffrey, but yes, I would love to hear more from you, Paul, about how you frame anthropology as in between.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the, one of the people that was, instrumental in my understanding well, there are a couple of people. There's Vincent Crapanzano, who wrote a beautiful book about consciousness, and he talks about the between. And then from reading that, I went to read about a guy reading about Ibn al-Arabiya, who was a 12th century Sufi mystic who wrote about the between. And the between in Sufi thought is called barzakh, which is that which connects two distinct entities, right? It's like a bridge. And and he says, and I agree with this, is that when you're between two entities, this is the space of dreams. This is the space of, it's a turbulent space, but it's a space of dreams. It's the space of innovation. It's a space of invention. It's a space of change. And it's a struggle to be there because you're being pulled, your past is, if you look to the left, that's your past, and you understand what that is, and you look to the right, the other side, that's your future. You don't know what to expect. And there's a parable that I like to a Sufi story about an old man who his friend is in another village and he's very sick and he wants to visit his old friend before he dies. And so, but he has to cross a footbridge. And so he gets on this rickety footbridge and it's about 100-foot drop to a raging river underneath. And and it's creaky and the wind is whipping him back and forth and he's afraid of heights. And he decides, and he doesn't know what to do. He's stuck. He's frozen in fear. Then all of a sudden, in the turbulence of that fear, his mind clears, and he sees a path forward. And he goes to the other side and meets his future. Right. So, anthropologists are always between things. We're between the field. Clifford Geertz wrote about this, and we're between the, being there and being here, right? And very often we don't really negotiate, so we're either there or here, but in between is a space where you can take the best elements of being there and mix it with elements of being here. I call it weaving the world, So, it's sort of like an ethnography can be more like a tapestry in which the threads of different elements are woven together into a pattern that makes a beautiful blanket. And so one of the books I wrote was all about that sort of notion of weaving the stories of West African immigrants in New York City. And in so doing, telling their story, using their stories as a way of talking about, informal economies, talking about immigration law, talking about social alienation, things of that nature, and diasporas. And so it was a way of, there's narrative, but there's also analysis that's, the narrative sort of provokes an analysis. And so all of that comes from this notion of being between that's the space of creativity and invention. It's not an easy place to be, but if you stick with it, it can create really beautiful things.
I think that every ethnographer experience sort of, the conundrums and, the challenges, but also the opportunities of living in this space, right? And I personally very much agree with you in, grounding more and more our work into ethnography and being able to access different publics with the, stories that we tell and analysis that we make in this tapestry that you just said. Jeff, how do you react as a, again, another generation to this type of discourses?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, it really resonates and makes sort of perfect sense that sort of the job and the body of the ethnographer in these moments is to actually put yourself in that in between. And actually, there's a question from the audience that I think ties in with my thinking, which is around transmission. So in some ways, being in that in between space, part of what then is happening is weaving that tapestry such that it can be picked up and understood by others who maybe haven't inhabited the in-between. And there's a question from Gwyn in the chat, which is around specifically transmission of incantations. This person's actually asking if you are able to share any incantations. But maybe building on that specific question, if you could talk a little bit about the way in which knowledge is transmitted by the Songki and in your work, and can you take an incantation out of the larger context? Are there things that should not be transmitted? How does all of that work in this world and in your work?
Excellent question. So Songhai people believe that, they taught me incantations. My teachers taught me incantations, but they made me promise never to publish the actual words, right? So I have translations of the words, right? But and the reason for that is that what is powerful about an incantation is not what the words mean, it's the sound of the words. And sound is the only sense that is physical. It travels, right? It enters. And so if you publish the actual words, then someone could use them for whatever purpose. So they made me promise never to do that. I've never published an actual incant. I mean, I can recite them, but I never published an actual incantation. So it goes against, for us, words contain meaning, right? For them, words contain meaning, but the sound contour of the word is where the power of it is embedded. So there's one particular incantation where they talk about how do you, if you confront a witch flying in the sky. In the song, I have this notion of witches flying at night. So if you are a healer and you see that, there's an incantation you can recite. And there are all these words that you recite, and it says, this is the sound of the word, and it goes into the sky and enters the body of the flying witch, and then it sort of destabilizes the witch. They fall to the ground. They're harmless, right? They can't do their dirty work. So there is a kind of one element describes what's happening, but what happens, the destabilizing force is the sound of the words, not the meaning of the words. And so that's kind of a difficult thing for us in the West to sort of grapple with. But the same kind of thing there's a colleague of mine in France named Jean Favre-Sada, who wrote a book called Deadly Words, in which he talks about pretty much the same kind of thing, is that what's important about the words is not so much what they mean, but how the sound contours of them. That's where the power is. And that's the power, the transformative power. It's in the sound of the words, not the actual words. So there are incantations. There are many things that I was taught which I'm not allowed to talk about. And although my teachers have mostly passed, I have to respect their wishes, and so there's no need to reveal all of the things that are kept within families, with families of healers, and not to be used, not to be used by anyone. So there are lots of things that I've not put into words, and I will never do that.
Thank you, Paul. That's very interesting. I'm currently working on light language. So the language is allegedly channeled by ETs, right, in New Age spaces. And that very much resonates in the power of sound rather than of meaning. And is a kind of extreme example here in our context of how somehow this approach to meaning, to sound, is making space also here among us. I think we have just time for a last question because time passes fast. So what advice you have for students interested in doing this type of research? Jeff, do you want to add a question, to riff on this? Do you have a specific?
I think that's perfect. Yeah, just thinking about, especially given sort of the context of academia and this desire to
Yeah.
move faster, how can students do slow ethnography?
Okay, so one has to confront institutional reality, right? There's no getting around that. So, and the institutional sort of expectations of younger scholars hasn't changed all that much over time. And so I encourage my students and people who do my writing workshops, I encourage them, obviously they have to publish in journals. They have to publish, monographs in with academic houses and publishers. And there's no one way to write anything. That's the way I advocate is one way of writing, but there's no one preferred method. Some of my writing is very academic. If I'm writing an academic essay, it's very academic, and there's citations and all that kind of stuff. It's not so. I would say for someone who's contemplating a career in academic life, is master the discourse of academia. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can express a lot of very interesting ideas. You can theorize, and maybe it's a tool that you can use to better understand what you're confronting or trying to understand. But the techniques for narration, that there's no reason why you can't at the same time. You can write blogs, which you can use narrative in blogs. You can do podcasts. We can tell stories in podcasts about your experiences, and then using the tools of evoking space and place, crafting dialogue and constructing character. These are things that you can include here and there in your sort of academic discourse, but you can also keep that in your back pocket to use in a future day, say after you get tenure, and so it's something that you can always use to realize, the ultimate goal is, and it's a slow process, is to produce knowledge that makes life sweeter for people, which is the classical definition of wisdom. And that's what it is. And so to do that is, if you can do it in any number of ways. There's no one way to do that. But for me, it's creating these kind of narrative ethnographies that are based on techniques of creative nonfiction and fiction, to bring the reader into the text.
Thank you, Paul. I think we can really close with this beautiful image as anthropology as making life sweeter to people, and how revolutionary is this approach to anthropology. Unfortunately, I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jeffrey.
My pleasure. Thank you for having
being
me.
part of the conversation.
Thank you for listening.
And thank you, all of you, all of the audience, for having been with us and being part of the conversation with your questions and with your interest. Please stay tuned on the activity of the Center, on the Transcendence and Transformation Initiative, and of Gnoseologies. And a little shout out that the next Gnoseologies event will be on April 10th. And we'll have a conversation with Professor Heather Friedman on her podcast, actually, that I suggest you to check it out, Magic in the United States. So thank you all again, Paul, Jeffrey, and the audience for having been here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Sponsor, Center for the Study of World Religions.
Copyright 2024, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.